Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this Powermate Pulse generator. This one was dropped off by my friend Jason, who actually pulled it from the trash. Looking at it, you would not guess that. This machine is probably the cleanest Powermate Pulse I have ever worked on. Everything is spotless. All the hardware is rust free. It seems to be complete. So I would say this likely is a very low hours machine. So, that just begs the question, why would someone throw this away? And, well, I discovered one reason. Let me show you. So the only thing I've done to this since Jason dropped it off was pull the engine over. And thankfully it's not stuck. That said though, I don't feel a lot of compression, so I think we might have an issue there. But I think compression is probably the least of our problems, because if I turn this over faster, I hear a noise. Hopefully you can hear it too. So yeah, that noise, it is not a good one. It kind of sounds like rod knock. That said though, I am going to give it the benefit of the doubt because it's a little bit hard to place. It almost sounds external, like near the starter recoil. So, I'm thinking we just need to start peeling the layers and figure out where that noise is coming from before we do anything else. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. So I'm going to start by getting this panel off right here. The noise, it does sound kind of in this area. So there's just 2 bolts on the bottom, 2 on the top. We need to cut the rope, and theoretically this panel should come right out. Yeah, with that panel removed, we can at least see the blower housing, but we can't actually remove it. We only have access to the bolt down there and the one that's on the other side, but there's actually a couple more up here, and this bracket is in the way. And to remove that, I think we need to remove quite a bit more. So we will do that in a minute, but I'm thinking let's just check the oil real quick, see if we have any. All right, let's have a look at the oil. If there is any, it should be filled to the last thread, and it's not. But if I tip it, you can see there is some oil in there. It's actually pretty dark, but it doesn't look bad. I don't see metal. I don't see water. So that is a good sign. I'm pretty sure the tank's empty, but let's turn the fuel valve off. I'm going to cut the line, and I believe the tank just lifts off. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're going to have to loosen up the panel on the other side. Maybe not. Yeah, let's loosen this one up. Interesting. The bottom bolts, they're actually going right through the stator, and there's a nut on the other side. So, yeah, maybe not the best design, but it is what it is. So let me get a wrench on the nut, and we'll remove the bottom two stator bolts. This front control panel too, it also doubles as the support for the rotor. So it's also the end housing for the generator. So let's unplug some of these connectors, and I think we can just get this out of the way. And then this is the kill wire right here. Did I mention this thing looks brand new? But it's not. You know, these I think were made in the late 90s. You know, I guess when we dig a little further, we should find a date code on the engine, so that'll give us a little bit more insight. Anyway, this is a brushless generator. There are no brushes there. We have the capacitor right there, and we also have a bridge rectifier. This unit has DC out on the control panel. Anyway, now that we're in, let's try to get that tank out. You know, although I'm pretty sure I could get this out, I think the proper way here is to get this panel off. So let's remove that. We're going to have to do it anyway because this is part of the bracket that's holding that blower housing on. And the last two bolts, they are the top stator bolts that hold the stator to the bell housing. So before I remove those, I am going to just remove these screws holding these in place. We'll just kind of let them hang. And we also have a ground wire we need to remove. And second thought, I'm just going to unplug the wires. For the capacitor, they are both yellow wires. Doesn't matter which side they go on. So you could reverse them and it wouldn't have any negative consequence. The bridge rectifier, though, that is a little bit different. The yellow wires, that is AC in. So again, doesn't matter with the yellow, but the output, you do want to take note of which is which, because one is positive and the other one's negative. We're just about there. Only 3 more nuts, and I think this bracket will lift out of the way, giving us the access we need to get the blower housing off. Now, the scary thing is, if you need to replace this rope, then you need to do everything that I've done to get the access you need. Anyway, now that we're in as far as we are, I can see the engine information here on the side. It's stamped into the side of the blower housing. So we have the model, the type. We also have the date code, 940603. So this engine was made June 3rd of 1994. Anyway, I did notice one big clue, potentially, as to what happened to this engine. This is an air-cooled engine. There is a fan behind here blowing air across the head. But in order for that to work properly, you need to have the tins in place. And this one's not. So like this, the engine may not have been cooling properly and potentially overheated. So I guess the question in my mind is, did it come like this from the factory, or did the prior owner do that at some point? That I am not sure. But like this, I could see the engine having problems. Anyway, let's get these nuts off and move on. Did I mention this engine looks brand new? I have not seen one so clean without compression. At least I don't think it has compression. Maybe we should check that before pulling this blower housing off. Looks like the original plug, since we have some black overspray. It's a J19LM. So let's give this a few pulls. Now, I don't know if this has a compression release. If it does, 50, maybe 60 PSI is the best we're going to see. So let's give it a try. Maybe we'll wedge it in right there. And yeah, that needle barely moved. So not zero, but certainly not where it needs to be. It's probably one of the cleanest flywheels and coils I've seen. I still hear the noise. This is top dead center. If I rotate this 180 degrees, so now this magnet is facing straight down, we're at the bottom of the piston travel, and if it was rod knock, we should still hear that noise. But we don't hear anything. So that's actually a good sign. The connecting rod and the crankshaft might be okay. And this coil does look extremely close to the magnet. Potentially the noise is coming from there, though not so sure about that. So let's get these two bolts out, see if that noise goes away. Yeah, I'm not sure about this one. Let me add a little bit of oil in the cylinder, and we'll rotate this again. I can still hear that noise a little bit. It's definitely quieted down. And again, no noise when the piston's at the bottom of its travel. So I don't think the connecting rod is the issue. There may not actually be an issue. So let me see if I can find something to spin this at high speed. And we'll just listen, see if we hear a knock. Sounds good. And I think the compression may have come up as well. You know, there's a lot of oil in there, so it could be a ring issue. Or it could just be a little bit of rust on the valves. You know, this machine, I would say, hasn't run in a while. So I'm going to spin it maybe a little bit more, and then we'll check the compression again. I think it's good. Let's double check the compression. This time though, I'm going to spin it with the drill. I'm hoping for something a little better than we saw last time, which shouldn't be too hard to beat. So about 20 PSI, let's try a little faster. There we go. It's about 140. That should run the engine. Well, that test told me some really good information. And I guess most importantly, the compression is actually excellent when turning the engine over fast. We got 140 PSI. The problem is, when turning the engine over slow, the compression is actually very low, much lower than it should be. So with compression that low, it's questionable whether the engine will start at all. But if it does start, it should take off and actually do quite well. So the question is, you know, why is it so low? Is that a feature or a flaw? And really, the only thing in play here is the decompression system. Either it's just machined in such a way that it's overly aggressive, or if we're lucky, we might need to adjust the valves. So I think we should start there. That's probably the easiest thing to do. So I'm going to get the carburetor out of the way. That's just going to provide better access to the valve cover. And we'll double check where the clearance is at. Interesting. A lot of oil on the bottom of this filter. So that likely would have come from, I would say, the crankcase vent. It's actually connected right behind here. You know, maybe this engine was on its side at one point. So I'm not too worried about that. The element itself is actually pretty clean and oil-free. It's really just the bottom here that needs to be cleaned up. Those bolts were surprisingly loose. That was also pretty loose, both of them. So someone's been in here at some point. And that gives me hope that whatever's going on here, either they adjusted something wrong, or maybe they were trying to chase the problem and kind of gave up. So right there, that is the exhaust valve that just opened. So that's the exhaust stroke. If we keep turning, we'll see the exhaust valve close. Now the intake is opening. So that we'll be pulling in air and fuel. And now both valves are closed. So the piston's at the bottom. If I keep rotating, that'll be the compression stroke. But because the engine's not at speed, the decompression system is going to bump the exhaust valve just a bit. Right there. And that's what's letting the compression out. And if we keep going, now we're at top dead center. So both valves should be closed, and I'm going to double check the clearance. The exhaust should be 0.08 of an inch, and the intake 0.06 of an inch. Now, these are plus or minus 1/1000th, so anywhere close should be good. But what I'm thinking is that the exhaust, if it's too tight, it's going to bump that valve a little bit longer than it should, and it's going to open it a little bit more than it should, letting that compression out, which might explain the low numbers. So let's start. Actually, we'll check with a 0.007 feeler gauge, which is the minimum clearance that should be in there. And no, 7 doesn't fit. So let's bring that down to a 4. And a 4 does not fit. So yeah, I think we know where the compression's going. Let's try a 2. So a 2 kind of fits. It's actually really tight. So yeah, we know the problem. The exhaust valve, it is too tight and actually approaching 0 valve lash, which would cause this engine to not run. Let's check the intake. Yeah, 0.005. It does not fit, although it feels like it's close. But 0.005, that is the minimum spec. So both valves are out of adjustment. Let's try a 4. See if that goes in. And yeah, 0.004. It does fit and feels pretty good. So yeah, both valves, they are out of spec. You know, if the intake was the only issue, being 1/1000th too tight, I'd probably leave good enough alone. But the exhaust, that is way off. And we're seeing the result of that with the compression test. So without a doubt, we need to adjust the valves. Yeah, I don't like the feel of that one. Yeah, it's probably a good thing we did pull the head off because there is a lot of loose carbon in here. And as soon as the engine starts to run, some of this is going to break off. Yeah, it could score the cylinder. And it could also get caught between the valve and the valve seat, causing the valve to not seal. So we will clean this up thoroughly before putting it back together. But the real reason we're in here is to make the valve adjustment. On a flathead engine, the only way to adjust the valves is to pull the head, and the adjustment process is actually pretty crude. You just take the valve out and literally just grind some of the valve stem away until you get the proper clearance. So, it is something you want to do carefully because if you take too much off, you can't put it back. The only fix is to order a new valve. Anyway, valve adjustments, it is a normal thing you have to do once in a while. As the engine runs, the valve slowly wears into the seat. So it actually starts to sink in a little bit. And as it does that, the clearance decreases until you get to zero clearance, in which case the engine isn't going to run at all. So let's release these valves. We'll get them out. We will make the adjustment and get this thing back together. And there's an up close look at the cylinder. And I think you can see there is still plenty of crosshatch. And there is absolutely no scoring. I was aiming for the high side of the spec, which was 9 thousandths on the exhaust, and we actually overshot it just a bit at 10 thousandths of an inch, which shouldn't be an issue. If anything, it's going to be a lot better than it was. And on the intake, I was aiming for 7 thousandths, and that's where we're at. So let's get the valves back out. We'll just clean them up and lap them in. Yeah, so theoretically, this can go back together and maybe it'll run. That said, though, I need a head gasket, so I did order one. It's going to be a few days before it gets here. So while we wait for that, let's go through the carb. I'm sure it has issues. They usually do. And while we're at it, we'll just double check this 30-year-old capacitor and make sure it's still good. So the carb, I don't think is going to be in terrible shape. At least looking at it from the outside, it looks pretty good. It is the original carb, though. There is black overspray on it. So this is a 30-year-old carb. But the tank was dry, so there is a good chance this was stored properly. And the fact that this bolt is coming out so easily is a good sign. A little bit of varnish, but not too bad. That'll clean right up. Bowl also looks pretty good. Just a touch of varnish. The float is not stuck. Pin comes right out. And yeah, a little varnish in here. That tube on the right might have a blockage. This is the pilot needle. Let's turn this in before taking it out, see where it's at. So there's half, 1, 1.5, 1 3/4. And that's pretty much it. These carbs are very simple. So I'm just going to run through all the passages, make sure they're clear. We'll soak this for about 5 minutes in the ultrasonic, and I think we'll be in good shape. We kind of lucked out on this carb. A few years ago I needed one of these and discovered that you can't buy them, new or used, and there were no clone options either. Potentially that has changed, but I'd much rather run an OEM carb than a clone, because the clones, at least the non-Honda clones, usually don't run the engine very well. Carb cleaned up pretty well. Maybe a little bit too well. We took some of the original paint off, unfortunately. But as far as the internals go, they look spotless. So, this carb probably would have run the engine before cleaning it. I'm hoping now it's going to run it perfect. So we'll set this back to where it was, which was 1 3/4 out. So we'll lightly bottom it out, which is right there. Turn it out half, 1, 1.5, 1 3/4. Then we'll get the needle and float back in. So let's check this capacitor real quick. It is rated at 7.5 microfarad, plus or minus 5%. So being that this is 30 years old, it's something you want to check because they do not last forever. So let's see if we're still close. And yeah, 7.55 microfarad. So despite its age, this capacitor should work fine. Well, since we're kind of low on oil, I think I am going to change it Usually I wait until we get some heat in the engine, but there's really no point in filling it up halfway just to mix it with dirty oil. Well, it's been just a few days, and today the head gasket showed up. So let's get that installed. We'll get the rest of the machine together, and we'll try it out. Yeah, we got lucky with the valve cover gasket. Usually they rip, but this one came out clean. Yeah, sometimes I get a little bit ahead of myself, but this piece right here should have been in place before installing these three head bolts in the front. So I do need to pull these out, kind of slip this in place, and then torque these back down. All right, let's double check the compression. Now that the valves are adjusted, I'm hoping we're going to see something closer to 50 PSI. And yeah, that adjustment made a big difference. We're now at 50 PSI. So this engine, I think it's going to run. And for now, I'm going to put the original plug back in. You know, I was hoping to replace it. I thought I had another, and I do. But the replacement that I have is a J17LM, and this one is a J19LM. So they are a different heat range. So until I get a new one ordered up, you know, we'll run with the original. All right, so let's get these wires reconnected. I'm going to start with the ground wire, which goes on this terminal back here. That feels good enough. And then we have this connector here. This is the DC output, which goes over to the control panel. So this yellow wire goes on the top right. And the green on the bottom left. And then the orange wires, those are the AC inputs coming from the stator. All right, those are good. And then we have these two yellow for the capacitor. And that's pretty much it. We just have these wires which go into the control panel. So let's get that installed next. And before we get that control panel on, I am going to grease up the rotor just a bit because there is a needle roller bearing that goes over this shaft. So I've already greased that up, but you don't want to put too much or else you're going to fling the grease all over the generator. place your bets. How many pulls? Is it going to make power? And is the engine going to sound healthy? That we are about to find out. All right, the fuel's on, choke's on, and ignition is on. Well, if you guessed 2 pulls, you'd be right. You know, it started right up, the engine sounded good, and it's making power. Now, I couldn't turn the choke off. The engine would start surging. Luckily, this does have an adjustable needle. So I backed that out about maybe half a turn, and then I was able to turn the choke off all the way, and the engine ran nice and smooth. You know, as far as the smoke goes, I did let it run for almost 2 minutes, and by the end of that time, the smoke was just about gone. So I think we're looking pretty good. So let's finish getting this together, and then we'll get it outside and put it to the test. Yeah, I'm just noticing the pre-filter, it's kind of dirty, and more importantly, the foam is failing. So I'm going to order one of those up. You know, for now, we're just going to emit it. The filter itself isn't too bad. I think we're pretty much ready to go. Now, this machine, it is only rated at 1400 watts, so it'll be interesting to see what happens because the space heater on low is 750 watts, but on high, it is 1500 watts. So I am going to try an overload of 1500 watts. Potentially, I'll turn that light on as well, which would add about another 100 watts, so 1600 watts in total. But for now, the plan is to get the engine started. We'll let it warm up. As it's warming up, we will double check the output, both the volts as well as the hertz, and see what the power quality is like. Now, this machine, I'm not expecting it to produce clean power. I'm thinking somewhere around the 20 to 25% range is what we're going to see. So let's get the engine started and find out. It was a little bit hard to get this machine going. It took 2 pulls and I could not turn the choke off right away. I had to let it run for about a minute, but I was able to turn the choke off and the engine is running smooth right now. You know, as far as the power quality goes, it's a bit of a horror show. The THD without a load is quite high at about 23% THD, and the sine wave is a train wreck. It does not look good, but this type of machine actually will clean up a bit under load, at least as far as how the sine wave looks. You know, as far as the THD, I don't think that's going to go down at all. Likely that's just going to go up. So let's put on a 750 watt load and we'll check back on the power quality. Yeah, the carburetor, it is not happy. I did have to apply partial choke at a 750 watt load to get that surge to go away. So likely I'm going to cut the test short. You know, I think I need to go through that carb again. You know, as far as the power quality goes, you know, the sine wave looks a little bit better. Still pretty bad. And the THD jumped quite a bit to 27%. So yeah, pretty high. Not great power quality. Anyway, let's take the load off and we'll let this thing cool down and we'll take a look at that carb, see if there's anything we can do to get it to run better. So the fact that it took 2 pulls to get it to start and that I couldn't turn the choke off for a good minute without it surging tells me that the pilot circuit is clogged. But we also had surging under a moderate load, which tells me the main jet is the problem. So, you know, potentially both are a problem, but the pilot circuit, it does provide fuel at all speeds. So I'm thinking we should start there. We should adjust the needle to allow more fuel into the carb throughout the RPM range. Unfortunately, the needle is not on the side of the carb that I can access. It's actually on the other side, and the only way to get access to it is to pull this cover off. So I'm going to remove the cover. You know, I'll back out that needle maybe half a turn. We'll try starting it with the cover kind of dangling, and we'll try to fine tune it. Hopefully that will do the trick. Although maybe I'm wrong, there is a little cutout right there. So yeah, if I pull the airbox cover off, I might potentially be able to make that adjustment without removing this cover. So yeah, let's get the airbox cover off. That should give us a better view of what we're aiming for. And we'll try to back that screw out, maybe half a turn. We'll restart it and see if that makes any difference. No, there's no way I can make that adjustment using that little hole right there. So yeah, let's stick to plan A. We'll get the cover off. I'm going to give it a half turn. And I'll try to start the engine with the cover off. And we'll put the 750 watt load back on quickly just to see if we can fine tune that needle at all to get the surge to go away. Unfortunately, backing out that pilot needle did not fix the issue. The engine still surges under about a half load, a 750 watts. So I think the main jet is to blame here. So I'm going to get the airbox off, and then we'll have access to the bowl. And it's actually the bolt that holds the bowl on that is the main jet. So we'll just get that out. We'll go through it again and make sure it's clean. So it looks like a 71 micro drill bit goes through. That's the largest one that goes through. And the next size up does not. So there could be some plaque on this jet, or I might drill it out, but I'm thinking, let's run this bit through It's either going to clean up some junk or make it a little bigger, which hopefully will fix the issue we're seeing out there. And actually, we're already through. So yeah, it could have just been a little bit of buildup there. So I'm going to get this reinstalled and we'll try it again. All right, let's try this again. I've got the jet reinstalled. I'm going to leave the airbox off. And I did reset the pilot needle to 1 3/4 turnout. So we'll get it started. We'll try a half load. If that goes well, I'm going to bump it up to 1500 real quick just to make sure that this can run the machine. And that did it. So the jet, although it seemed like it was clean, it really wasn't. You know, I put that larger drill bit through and it actually went through the jet fairly quickly. Like, I don't think I was actually drilling the jet or drilling metal out of the jet. I think there was just some plaque buildup on there. So now it runs without issue under a 750 watt load. And I even bumped it up to 1500 watts and actually 1600 if you count the lights. So I guess I kind of ruined the surprise. So this can handle an overload at least for a short time. Anyway, I am going to get this fully back together. We'll get it restarted, kind of resume where we left off, except this time at half load, we will have the choke fully open, and then we'll go for the max and just double check the power quality. Now this time it started first pull and I was able to turn the choke off right away. It did stumble a little bit, but it quickly worked itself out. So the jetting, for sure, it is a lot better than it was the first time we tried this. And of course the power quality, that hasn't changed without a load, so let's put a half load on it and see how it does this time. No issues this time. At 750 watts, we're running quite well. The engine is nice and stable. THD is also stable at about 27%. And the sine wave, yeah, not great, but it is better than it was without a load. So we'll give this a second, and then we'll go for an overload. We're at 1500 watts, it's a 100-watt overload, and the engine's working hard, but it's definitely not out of power. You know, under this kind of load, the THD didn't move a whole lot. We're now at about 28% THD, and the sine wave looks about the same. So I'm going to give this a minute, maybe two, and then I'm going to turn that light on to bring the load up to 1600 watts. And no issues with 1600 watts. So the engine, it has plenty of horsepower to spare, but the voltage, it is coming down quickly. You know, adding that extra 100 watts, we're now down to 105 volts, which is expected. There is no AVR. THD is close to 29%, and the sine wave looks the same. So I'm going to take the load off, we'll let things cool down, and then we'll shut it down. Well, guys, that's pretty much a wrap. You know, going into this, I didn't give this machine much of a chance, you know, given the bad noise I heard when turning it over and the fact that the compression was practically zero. This video actually wasn't going to be about this machine other than declaring it dead. And actually, Jason dropped off not one, but two of these. And the other machine actually has compression, although it is missing some discontinued parts. So the plan was to use the parts from the green machine to bring this one back to 100%. And of course, as it turns out, the green one actually wasn't a parts machine. You know, we just had to adjust the valves. We had to clean the carb and ultimately clean that jet out extra good. And now this is running like it should. It had no issues pulling its rated load of 1400 watts. It handled an overload of 1600 watts without issue. So I would say this is running as good as it ever has. Now, as far as the power quality goes, yeah, that's a different story. I mean, this is not a clean machine. In fact, it's one of the worst I have tested. I think the highest THD I saw was about 28, maybe 29%, which is pretty high. So if you have one of these machines, I would definitely keep that in mind when powering devices, because this, more than other machines, could damage that equipment. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.